I'll start. Okay, so I'm Mike Ball, and this is Scott Felbinger. I'm an independent contractor, and I think I know pretty much everybody here now. So, but Scott is the CTO of Cladwell, and he and I worked together on a project. And this was a thing. It's kind of it's a back office tool. It's called the Affiliate Importer. But it's basically the idea is that Cladwell is like a clothing recommendation site. So they import data from lots of different affiliate providers. So a lot of different clothiers, publish their data, and he has to pull it in, and then there's a lot of data cleanup that has to happen and kind of data assembly. So he needed a back office tool that the business people could use to go through the data and kind of mark it and tag it and group it and things like that. So so the front end is Angular and the back end is Java, and it uses Elasticsearch for the search. So I had never used Elasticsearch, but it's pretty cool. And Scott did all the back end stuff. He'll be able to explain it pretty well. And then I did the front end part that was the Angular part to call the Elasticsearch services, and I can explain a little bit how that fit together. And it worked really well. And so first we can kind of show it, and then we have a little picture. I'm going to kind of search for stuff like socks, and search for socks, and then I can say, oh, those are the socks I was looking for. I want those in our catalog, right? And I can import it, and I can click on it to get more. Is there a way to get more details? Oh, there we go. So get some more details about the item itself, and again, this is a business person. They're like, oh yeah, that looks like the pair of socks we want to have in our catalog, and all the data looks good and the prices look right. So at that point, they would add it, and then we also have with that some ability to search categories and this on here, but we're using UI router. So I can say, I want to search these two categories and search those, and those aren't really socks, and that would be the issue. And they would say, well, that data is not right, so that's when they would fix it. You can see here that this URL is bookmarkable, so that if the business person is kind of working on some set of things, they can bookmark their search, and like the next day they come back and they're right, kind of back where they were. So also the other thing you can do is you can kind of group things. So I can say, okay, I want the black socks and the brown socks to be in my group of socks, that kind of thing, and then import that as a group. So you could build outfits or collections of things and stuff like that. So do you want to kind of go over? Did I leave out anything, or?
Yeah, just one thing to point out is all of this front end is being driven off of data from Elasticsearch, so we're not pre-populating any data at all from Mongo. On the back end, we're actually feeding data feeds into Mongo, and then using we got a picture here. So we're feeding data into Mongo based on a bunch of product feeds that we get, and then we're using this cool thing called the Elasticsearch Mongo River, which is all on GitHub. Some guy wrote this ticket, and basically it lets Elasticsearch act as a replica node to Mongo. So any data you push in there, it automatically indexes it and pushes it into Elasticsearch. So what we're doing on the browser side and the AngularJS side is we're actually doing facet calls to get out some of the images that you see over in or some of the categories and brand information to be able to add information in for your search. And so we're using Angular to go directly to Elasticsearch, and then when we do imports, it actually sends the data back to the Java side, and then that'll send stuff to Mongo, and then it'll kind of round trip through Elasticsearch. So
okay. That's kind of have any questions about that? Does anybody use Elasticsearch? Or okay, so Jim. Anybody else?
It's server side though, not.
Sure. Okay. Anybody else using something that's an alternative to Elasticsearch? I think there's a few. There's like Amazon has one. Solar. Okay. Elasticsearch you use Elasticsearch's hosted service though, right?
We're running that ourselves.
Okay, we're running it ourselves. Okay. All right. So let's see if I can.
In the UI real quick.
Yeah.
What's the URL look like if you select multiple categories?
I knew you were going to ask that.
Because we're doing this right now.
Yeah. So I just put categories. I make a multi, just like I would do any other URL. I put multiple categories in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you
And
ever do anything special to get?
you know what? It was so long ago that I actually wrote it. I don't remember. So we can look and see what I did. I just don't recall. But it is UI router.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting at.
This is, yes. So Kevin had asked me this specific question beforehand. Yeah. So this is, no, it's cool. So I have to find the code here though.
That's funny when you come to talk about this today.
Yeah.
Angular is actually passing that like with an Ajax, right? Okay.
Yeah, so Angular will, I'll show you how it works, but Angular will, there's an Elasticsearch service that you wrap up in an Angular factory, and then you pass in queries to it. It makes a JSON-P call to Elasticsearch and gets back the results. That's really it. So, but they have that API. It's called the ES client, Elasticsearch client. You pass in some configuration where the server is, maybe some other rules, a token, I think, stuff like that. And then it connects and makes sure everything's there. And then you can start running queries against it. So, and it's, so. So I gotta find this stuff again. So you asked me specifically about the categories, and so I'm using underscore, and I pluck out the terms from the categories, and I mash those together into my params.
Can you font bump that, Mike?
Yeah, sure. More? Good? Okay. Everybody? So here's my categories, and so let's just pay attention to what I'm doing to categories through here because I can't remember if I had to do anything special, Chris. Okay, is that fair? So that's when I'm assembling my search, and there should be a place down here where I kind of like, yeah, this one is where I get my, yeah, so search params is just giving me back categories as an array, and I'm going to loop through those and kind of like rehydrate them into the category objects because I'm just getting the key out to put in the URL, and then I kind of rehydrate them back into the actual objects at in this method. Okay, so I am getting back my array of terms, which are just strings, but then I have to go through each one and say, okay, well this is just a key to another real underlying category object. So is that okay?
Do you have to do anything on the state definition side? That
What?
was where we were.
No. I don't see anything I had to do special there. I am just resolving params. Okay. Okay. So as far as the services go, there are like a few Elasticsearch. Basically, you build this query of filters and stuff, and then you kind of throw it at Elasticsearch. So there are a couple like open source JavaScript libraries that will assemble a query for you, but they're not really rich enough yet to build the kind of queries we had to build, which were a lot of ands and ors and term queries and ranges and stuff like that. So we just basically have a big old method that kind of assembles. It's like a builder pattern kind of thing where it just mashes this object together to pass it through. So that's this kind of method here where it's adding filters that are ors and terms and filters and so on. And then let me see if I can find there's my HTTP error interceptor that I learned from Dale a couple meetings. There should be just a simple method here that just calls ES. Yeah, here it is. ESClient.search. I say search the. I should probably make that a little bigger. Search the products, and I pass in the query I just built, and I'm going to get back all my results. So pretty simple. Here's the factory to build ESClient, and literally like once he had the river in place, we were running searches within minutes. I mean, it was really nice. So, and then it was was just adding on the behavior we needed to build these queries to pass them through. So kind of a fun project. So, do we have any comments, questions, or concerns? So, all right, thanks, Scott. Did you had like a second diagram? What was the difference between this one?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to call out is the setup that we're using is for internal use only. Connecting directly to Elasticsearch if you need to do this from a client. It's not a very secure way to do it because Elasticsearch doesn't have a lot of security mechanisms around it. So if you need to run it outside, you probably want to do some sort of a proxy pass back from your,
That's what you're doing here.
yeah, from your
This
Angular
second
back to your server side, and then proxy that through Elasticsearch. I think at best you can do basic auth and Elasticsearch if you front end it with Apache. Or
Right.
Nginx
We're
or
calling
something.
Elasticsearch directly from the client, and you could easily proxy it through Node or something. So, cool. All right, thanks, Scott.
Yeah, sure.
So the other project I had was, I had never done, I'm not like a designer, and I kind of, everything I make looks awful by default, and so I've kind of like always used Bootstrap and stuff. So I had to do something for a client that had to look good, and so I'm like, well, I'm going to try to add some animation in, and because it's not something I do very often, I did not feel really comfortable. I know that in CSS you can do a lot of animations, but learning all this jargon to like do the animations was like kind of daunting, and I'm like, man, I'm not gonna, I can fade in and fade out, like that's all, I got that, like that's all I was able to do. So after like extensive Googling, I ran across animate.css. It's basically a library of just all these pre-written animations, and I'm like, oh, maybe I can use this. So it lets you kind of, just to preview some of these, you can make stuff do stuff, like bounce something in and bounce it out, and make stuff fade in, or here's a good one, flip in. So it kind of flips in, or rotate it in. It's like stuff like that. So it's already like prepackaged, and there's plenty of them, and they work well. So I'm like, okay, I'll try to do that. So I do work for Sporty's, a pilot training facility in Batavia, and they have training software that I wrote for them 4 years ago. And so they're like, they want to put like a front end kind of portal-y type thing, so a student can go in and see all their classes and stuff like that. So, oh, I don't have this running right now. Let me switch over. Okay. So I mean, I wrote this using Play framework like 4 years ago. It's not even like, it's been replaced multiple times now. So, but it works for me. So I'll fire all up. So I have a couple things. I'm using UI router and a bunch of like NgIfs and NgShows and stuff like that. And I can make stuff like flip out. I don't know why it's not hiding. Yeah, there it goes. I still like fire up. So flip in and out. I want to fade from one page to another. There's no course catalog, but fade from like one thing to another. So here, go from here to there. I'll show you what I'm going to do. Actually, so UI router can do animations when you switch from one thing to another. It actually uses the ng animate stuff. And then for this like flip in, flip out stuff, I'm using the NgShow, and it actually does these ng animate things so that you can make the things kind of go away. I don't know why it's pausing so much at the end. I bet I changed the timing, because it'll like go away in a second. I think I changed like it to be like a 4-second like animation instead. Yeah. So they were happy with how that's working. This is a dev branch, but so I wrote. I don't want to go through all this code because there's like tons of business logic and stuff. So I wrote like a little set of examples. So we'll go through these. So I have like how do you animate an NgShow? So I want to make something flip in and flip out, and then an NgIf to make something fade in and fade out. And then you can actually animate repeats. So I can make something flip into a list and flip out of a list. I think I have this one on like 4-second timeout. So why is it behaving so bizarrely? Usually like flips right in. There it goes. It flips in. That's better. So so we can look at those. That's kind of a fun thing to try to get working, but it can be frustrating. So actually, there's a way to debug NG animation. So I'll show you that too. So let's do in order NgShow. So here's the flip in for the NgShow, and if this one just makes something flip in, or I can change it. So what they have is the animations all written up, and then you have to hook them up to the Angular classes. So I'm going to show you this, and then I'll show you the Angular classes that you just have to hook up, and it's really easy. It's just a convention almost. So I can do stuff like once I have my animations kind of wrapped up. Do I have fade in? It's not fading in and fading out, but maybe I only did flip in for that one. So the one thing is I do have the UI router set up to do the fade in, fade out between all these guys, and then I have the NgShow, and so let's look at how those work. So basically, here's the animate.css, and it has all these things. I wish I would just do this size for everything. It has all these like all the WebKit keyframe stuff that I don't really comprehend a lot, like in place. So here's the bounce and the flash. All these different animations are kind of pre-written, and then I have to do stuff like the NgShow was the flip in. So I only did flip in for the NgShow. So NgShow actually adds the class NgHide or removes it. So what it does is once you say, okay, hide this thing, it will say, basically it'll add classes to that element till it gets to the NgHide. So it's like NgHide add active, and then eventually NgHide. And then when you take them away, it says NgHide remove active, and then it removes the NgHide classes. So it kind of stacks them up and then removes them away. And that gives you places to put the animations along the path.
Does it do that like instantly, or is there timing that you can set Angular?
So it will actually, it uses like the various native browsers events to see how long they take, and then it'll chain them. So it actually can say, it will actually look at the CSS, see if there's an animation for that CSS, chain the timings together, and then do them.
You can do those JavaScript callbacks
Yeah.
from CSS.
Yeah. So once I've added flip in, and Angular sees that flip in is a real class and it has animations, it binds stuff. That's what it does. Yeah. So here's the flip in and flip out for NgShow. And so this flip in X is the one out of animate.css. So whatever animation you want, you just put it there and how long you want it to take. And you just have to know that when you remove it, you're remember it's removing NgHide. So it's opposite, right? It's taking away the NgHide. So that means you are making the thing show up because you're removing NgHide. So this took me a long. I was like, why are my animations are backwards, man? And it was because you're removing a class instead of adding a class on when you show it. That's all. So it's kind of opposite. So it was a little bit of a brain freeze on my part. And then I'm adding NgHide, and I have to override the block display because I want to see the animation. So whereas Angular would usually say display none, I'm saying no, keep showing it until it's all done. So so that's how the NgShow works. It has it's adding ngHide and removing it, and so that's all it's doing.
So Angular actually parses that CSS somehow?
They can see if there's animations that are kind of bound via some kind of names. I haven't read through all the code. I don't even comprehend some of it because it's really bizarre, but it's interesting. Yeah. So so the ngIf is different, and I have to look at the documentation for ngIf because it's so kind of strange. It has a bunch of animations it does as well. All these come with examples, but this is the ngIf documentation. It adds ng enter and ng leave, and then each of those comes with an associated active or it's like I'm entering, I'm actively entering, I'm entered, like, and then this opposite. Okay, so so for that one, that was the ngIf. And so remember, ngIf actually adds the DOM element and then removes it. Right, so it's going to remove it once all the classes, it's gone through its steps of classes, then it removes the element, and then it brings the element to life and then adds all the classes, the final one being the one where it's actually visible. So
if you don't have any animations registered, like there's no CSS animations, is it just going to skip all those?
yeah, so which one is this? Is ngIf? So I called this like fade in. So I'll just kill the name of these things. So there's no more fade in, essentially. And then it's just going to show it and hide it. And it's also not going to add all those classes and take them away.
It'll just do
It's just
So it doesn't
On,
mess
off.
with your performance if it doesn't.
right. It'll just be like, okay, well, you didn't configure you have a class on here, but it isn't associated with an animation, basically. So let me do that so I don't lose my mind here. So for ngIf, I wrote a fade in one and a flip in one. So for my ngIf, I can go and say, oh no, don't fade it in, flip it in, and then I can toggle it, and so just change a class. Now I have fade in versus flip in, all that kind of stuff. So that's that. So that's NgShow and ngIf, and then ngRepeat is just like ngIf. So it's going to insert a DOM element or remove it. That's all. So it's going to do the same enter or leave. So that's what that last one does. So here's the ngRepeat, and if I remove one, it's going to remove the DOM element. I don't know when I made my timings like super long. I was playing with these. Oh yeah, so that's excessively long here. I think it's so long that it kind of like loses its context. So yeah, that's better. And add it. Flip them in, flip them out. Still seems like it's taking a long time.
Unlike you today.
I know. So then, so that's the ngRepeat, and so I can just switch flip in to fade in, and now it fades out instead of fading in. Yeah, I don't know. There. Now they fade in and fade out. So that's pretty awesome, I think so. And it just took some time to like understand it, and so now I just have some CSS I use. So every time I make a list that's like editable, I just have this CSS I use, and things will fade in and fade out instead of just showing and hiding, and it makes it look just a little bit better, like than usual. Like, so it's nice to have the fade in and fade out. I mean, if that's the only one you use, it like always looks good. Like, I mean, it just makes things look a little less edgy, and you can basically, and I didn't show this, but for the UI router, you can just hook onto the UI view attribute. So you could do the same thing and hook every NgShow and hide up to, you can hook up everything that's tagged with NgShow and NgHide via CSS. So let me show how. So for UI router, instead of using a class, I use the attribute selector in CSS. So I could use an attribute selector for NgShow and NgHide, and anything that has NgShow or NgHide, I could make it fade in and fade out. So I don't have to put a class on every single thing I have that's NgShow or NgHide. I can fade in and fade out every single thing that's NgShow and NgHide, just with CSS selector, right? So I could just do. So let me do this one. Say I wanted every single thing that was ng if to fade in and fade out. I would just do and that's every single element that's marked with ngIf now flips in and flips out, right? Because it's just how CSS works. Is that good? Yeah. So that's it. Any questions? I mean, does that make sense? So I think it performs even better in 1.3 because I removed a lot of the IE8 specific stuff. So they got to actually remove a lot of stuff from animation to work around how some of those other browsers do things. So, but very cool. All right. So if there's no questions, Dale's going to come up next, and he's been working on a project he'll show. And I'll let him. Let's do a switch over here, Kevin. So do I shut off? Do I turn off my thing?
Yeah, you can just plug in your computer and just go off that. You have like a VGA out on there or something?
Yeah. You hooked this machine up before. I know I got a desktop presenter. So.
Yeah, I can just film the screen. It's good. There we go. Cool. And then sure.
I'll just set it right there. Is that cool? Well, I didn't really have something to show so much. I was hoping to start a discussion a little bit about unit testing because, especially with Angular, I have a lot of problems with my tests just being really brittle. Like, like, I'm looking at, here's some specs I wrote for this account service that I have. What's that? Yep. Is that better? All right. Nothing revolutionary going in here at all. It's just, oops. Sorry. My keyboard shortcuts aren't working for some reason. Doesn't matter. It's just an account service, and I just have a bunch of blocks on here, just regular test. So, yeah, it's all Jasmine. So the problem I had when I first started writing Angular test is I would just come in, and in every it block, I would just create my system under test, whatever it was. I would say, okay, I'd do basically this right here, which is I would inject, get my account service and do whatever I had. If I had mocks, I'd put them in there or whatever. So what I found out would happen is a month later when I would go to edit that account service, the account service would take a new dependency, and now all of a sudden every one of these tests would break. It was just really brittle. So the next approach I started to take was with this before each. which is what I'm doing here. I'm just creating, you notice I have all of these kind of global variables up here. And in there, in my before each, I'm actually creating my account service here. This is kind of a bad example because account service doesn't really have any dependencies. If I look at this controller, I guess it's more obvious. And sorry, I didn't really have a lot of time to prepare for this. But you'll notice I have all these mocks that I'm creating in this kind of like as global variables. And then in my before each, I create my system under test. And this controller takes an account service, a notification dialog service, a state service, and I'm passing in some params and some other stuff. So my problem with this approach here is two things. In each of my it blocks, maybe I want to pass in a different set of state params. How do I really do that? Do I then go back and I have to have, do I wrap everything in a different describe block with a different before each? Am I making sense at all? I'm getting a lot of blank looks. Okay. So it's just a real problem. So now every time I change my login controller, all of the tests break. I have to come back in here in my before each and kind of create something. And I still really don't have a way like this return route. I don't have a way here in each of my it blocks to say I want a different return route, so I can do a different test on that. So that puts me back to either putting all this inside each it block, or trying to maybe do different describe blocks with each of them having their own before each, so I can have different labels. And that's kind of a pain in the butt. So I just recently started doing something a little different. I kind of wanted some feedback on it. It's the same thing I kind of do with server-side code. If you look in here, what I do is at the bottom of my spec, I create a SubFactory. And I've got this in a code snippet. I don't know what you guys call that. I'm probably the only .NET developer here besides Kevin. But basically, I just made this little code snippet thing drop in that's a SubFactory. Okay, SubFactory takes a config object, and in here I have a base config object. So this is what it's going to use by default. And when you generate the SubFactory, all it does is it just the same crap jQuery does. It takes the config object you passed in and merges it with whatever your base config object is. And then I create my mocks here, and then I have this little I always put this build function on it. And all the build function does is it builds my system under test using the config stuff that was passed in. So now, in each one of my tests, all I have to do is, like in this one, I'm just using the base thing, so I say SubFactory build. Here, I need my sut to have a different config object, so when I build my SubFactory, I just pass in some different config options, and I get back a sut set up like that. Does that kind of make sense?
Dale, is there a reason I don't see you using the Angular mocks built-in stuff for unit testing? Have you seen that?
Yeah. This is just stuff that doesn't need it.
Oh, it might save you some code with the inject stuff.
You mean the
The part where you're getting the injector and doing all that looks like stuff that you might be able to clean up by looking at the inject that Angular mocks gives you.
okay.
what we tend to do is in our before each, and sometimes,
You're talking about this this inject?
yeah, I'm talking
Oh,
about
yeah.
manually getting the injector and getting
Okay.
services and stuff.
So,
You
are,
can let Angular mocks do that for you.
right, but you mean by just passing in an array here with saying what I want and it passes them?
Well,
Are you talking about?
what we do is in our before each, we would have a before each that instead of just passing a function to before each, we
Uh-huh.
pass inject, which wraps our function, and then give us our dependencies directly.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So you do something like
And then inject right there,
inject.
and then a function inside of that.
Yeah, and that
declares
takes
its dependencies.
food.
Exactly. And then that
Yeah.
Angular give those to us.
Yeah,
And what you can do is each test that gets run is
Uh-huh.
run with its own context, its own this.
right.
So if it sometimes get dangerous because you can like name collide things, but inside that before each, if you said this dot foo instance equals new foo or something,
Right.
then in every subsequent it block you would have access to this dot foo,
Yeah.
and this dot foo instance.
That kind of leads me back to my one problem, which is how do I pass context into that now?
So you can set up different. So you can say this dot some variable equals empty string that's in its equal. And then in your if block you can say this dot some variable equals bar, and then run some assertions against bar change or against that variable changing.
Just change the piece that you need.
So you're saying, can you kind of say that one more time? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time. I'm not the brightest person here.
So, I mean, these are all like very different ways, but you could say this dot some var equals I don't know foo. And let's say later in an itblock you wanted to it something whatever. This is not CoffeeScript, but you get the idea.
Right,
you could
yeah.
say like this dot some var equals
Okay.
var, then assert that. Right, you could do that, and then you could. Sorry, I'm breaking.
It's all good.
But
don't worry about it.
then you can say expect my service or whatever that relies on that variable to change appropriately.
So, for instance, I guess let's look at this test right here. In the first thing here, I want my session service to return that I am authenticated, and in this one, I wanted to return that I'm not.
And you
Actually,
could-
that's a backward.
Right. So, and without getting too far into this, but you could like build some config options that might be like this dot some var.
Well, that's kind of what I'm doing here. I pass
Oh yeah.
pass them to my SubFactory.
So instead of true just being true, you could make that a variable that you could say this dot some var right there.
So then, because session service is basically this mock. It's returning me a user. I'm sorry, I'm lost.
It's okay. This stuff is hard. I mean,
Yeah. I just think there's got to be an easier way than this.
I like the factory approach. It's really obvious what's happening.
Right.
I will say that I really don't test controllers as much. I mean, I try not to test controllers. Typically, if I'm testing a controller directly, it means that there's too much logic in it, and I
Right.
need to move that out somewhere else.
Well, this is just happens to be a controller test. I can look at. I've got service tests that do
Right.
the same thing more or less.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, there's 3 tests in here, and you're right, I don't really test there's not too much you can write for a controller. If you are, then you obviously have an architecture problem. I think these were more just to try this out, I guess, because obviously there's not a lot of value in knowing that my controller says it is authenticated when session service says it's authenticated. You know what I mean? It's just passing something through. But
The other thing you might do, I don't know if it would help, but you could set it up in the before each that surrounded everything. You could set up a user factory, but then spy on it in a context farther down, just to override one particular method of Johnson and spies.
oh yeah, I guess that's what I'm kind of doing here.
Yeah, okay, you're doing that right there.
Yeah.
Or-
That's why I put
that makes sense.
on my SubFactory, I put all my mocks. I just set them up. The first thing I do is I build my mocks, and then any Angular service that I'll need in my test. So then when I call my factory, I can get a hold of any mock that's on there and change it. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I've started to take the stance of letting more top-level integration tests, like capybara tests that actually click on the thing. I tend to have
Right.
those tests exercise that like all my controllers and services are hooked up appropriately. But then just unit testing like individual services and individual factories.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just because I found that getting into like the root scope applies everywhere and like checking DOM just gets nuts.
So is that how you would do a directive as well? I mean, okay, you wouldn't actually unit test your directive?
I would unit test the directive, but not unit test.
You would unit test the logic, but not
Right.
the DOM. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, typically, unless there is like very specific Boolean logic happening in the DOM. Like there's tons of NgIfs and NgShows that I really want to like drill into. Then I would test that.
Right.
Like actually look at the DOM nodes, and I think I'm doing that. We're doing that in one of the directives we have because it's a little bit more complex.
Yeah. Have you guys run into the problem where, like, the directive calls an API when it first loads to get, in our example, we're querying all the customers' tags that they've used so that we can run a type ahead directive to get those tags? Like, every time I try to test a directive, when I inject it in, it keeps expecting HTTP backend is like saying it's
So your directive should probably not be making API calls.
okay.
Either a controller or some route should be making that API call and then somehow passing it into the directive. The result of that call and passing it into the directive. So your directive should just take an array of customer names if that's what you're trying to autocomplete. And then your test is really easy because you can just build up a fake array of names, pass that into your test thing, and then do some type of
The issue that I guess I have been having is like, if I do an expect to get on that API call, then it starts to try to get all the templates that are involved with the directive, and I have no idea what to do at that point. It's like I have like 14 templates that I'm expecting to get, and I have nothing to do with the directive. I kind of need to know what's going on.
Right.
Are
So
you
I just
using
need to send that directive, honestly.
Right.
are you using run or whatever, the like app.run?
Not sure what that run is.
Um
Oh, you mean in the
bear with
config?
me.
Like state this?
Yeah, I think I got
We have a run for some authentication stuff.
app.run, which basically it runs it'll bootstrap your module more or less.
Okay.
If you are passing in state, or what's the equivalent in the regular router? I don't know. Yeah, something like that. The reason I inject state into run is it actually it goes out and finds your template for your first route or whatever and downloads it. That's why I don't include this piece of JavaScript in my test.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're just getting all of our JavaScript at the moment in all the tests, so it's probably trying to build the entire application in the test or something. I don't know. I was having all kinds of trouble with that.
I ran into that exact same problem a long time ago, though. There's probably a better way than just not having your run go and test, but that's how I fixed it.
We cache all of our templates, so they all
Yeah, I
go
was gonna say we might have a problem because we can file a lot of templates into
template, the Angular template
the
cache.
cache provider.
That's awesome if you have Grunt, not so awesome if you have Visual Studio.
Like it grabs all the HTML and puts them in variables for you.
Yes, so there's this thing called an Angular template cache provider, and you just say like, here's a template that's like my homepage template, and then it's basically just puts that on an Angular.
Here's the template that lives at this URL. So
Yeah.
instead of going and fetching it, you just grab it.
Oh, okay.
And that's just a string.
So
of
you cache
HTML.
them on startup, like when you load the.
Well, no,
Yep.
our build tools take care of that, so it
It
takes
reads
all the
all the files,
HTML,
builds and
converts it to
converts to
JavaScript,
Oh,
and
okay.
it declares it as an Angular module that then is auto-loaded.
Can we do
into
that
your
with
app.
Grunt?
You can do it with Grunt.
Yeah, we should definitely do
Broccoli.
that.
And then you save.
That's way faster.
You save your users not having to make additional API.
It-
Right.
Additional
Grunt
HTML
actually will do
requests.
it for you.
That's awesome.
What is it? Grunt NG.
It's probably like Grunt templates or template cache or something.
Okay.
along those
So-
lines.
That's awesome.
Dale, there is, do you use bundles in .NET?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's an Angular template cache bundle maker.
I saw that. It doesn't work. Because what it does is it creates a separate module for each template. And then if you don't have all those modules included in your thing, it just doesn't work. And I actually, if you probably go out and look at that project, you'll see some colorful language from me in the comments.
Seems like something that would be easy to.
Yeah, it wouldn't be that bad. It's just, I guess it's just something I don't want to do.
It does help.
Yeah, it would help a lot. I've actually even messed around with thinking about,
Do you know open source.NET?
no. I've thought about like using Grunt or something like that as a post build on Visual Studio. After Visual Studio does my build, then using Grunt after that to do some stuff, which would be pretty easy. There's a million things that'd be pretty easy that I just haven't done.
Build tools are hard.
I get kind of irritated about it too because I just like want to write code and I want the rest of the crap just to work. But
It's like still so early in the JavaScript build tool
right.
evolution.
Any of the S6 modules?
But I'm hoping somebody like a lot smarter than me will create it and throw it on NuGet somewhere and I'll just download it. That'd
We
be
gave
the
quitting and moved to Grunt for that.
yeah. Grunt does a lot of cool stuff that
Good stuff.
Problem is that
we just don't do.
most of your time figuring it out.
Yeah. That's one thing I like about Visual Studio is it just works out of the box. You don't have to configure anything. You don't have to do anything. I can literally have a project going in, 30 seconds. But if you want something a little bit different, it's a pain.
Totally.
But, all right. Well, does anyone else have any suggestions for me? Thoughts? Oh, all right.
We're still struggling to do unit tests in general, so
What tests are- We have like 5 tests, I think. No, we have 30.
we have 30 with
30 out of like, way more than that we would need.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. I mean, you want to unit test specific logic, and then, but not too specific that they break every time.
I kind of bounce back and forth. Whenever I start a project, I write way more tests than I need.
Yeah.
And when my boss starts riding my ass, my number of tests gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So you always want the code I wrote up front because that's tested really well.
First version is the most solid. That's different.
Yeah. I wouldn't say the first, just the first code in that version.
Yeah, what you were saying about directed tests, Kevin, that I found like when I started testing the directives, like that I was writing, it was a lot of, hey, this should be in the DOM, and that ends up being really brittle. You have to like change the test every time you work on it.
Well, if anyone comes up with better ways, let me know. You guys did give me some good ideas, though.
Yeah, try using the inject.
The only reason I guess I used to do the inject, and I started doing the injector.get just because I started to get that big long string sometimes confuses me. You know what I mean? If it has like 12 things in there, I just can't process it.
Right.
You know what I mean? I wish I could, but I can't.
No, that's why I stopped testing it. I have to set up. It takes me more time to set up a test than the
Right.
actual test.
Sometimes that can be a smell when you have too many goods.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
When it becomes hard to test, that usually means that you need to rethink the architecture.
I just kind of feel like at this point I write more test code than I do regular code, and I think that's a problem.
No, that's totally valid. Our test code is probably way more than our
Really, I was
maybe not like maybe it's 1-to-1.
I was watching a podcast by that Adi Osmani, I think his name is, and he was saying your code should be 1-to-1, one test code for one. And I realize that's a blanket statement. It doesn't mean a whole lot. Yeah, one line of test code for one line of, and I'm probably at least 1.5 or 2-to-1 test code to regular code. So I don't know. Do you guys say you're about the same too?
Yeah, I mean it's tough because sometimes you got one line of application code that can handle like 4 different scenarios of inputs and outputs.
Right.
And so the test you definitely want like to test each individual scenario. So you might need 20 lines of code to test that one line of application code. But that could also be a smell that you're trying to do too much in one line of code.
Right. All right. Well, I guess
It's more an art than
it seems like it's a lot easier on the server side for me. I don't know why.
definitely.
All right. Yeah, next time I open that up, it'll never work again. So, that's all I have.